like to thank you so much for this great honor you've bestowed, the Sokrates-Preis right behind me. I feel truly humbled, and I want to thank you for the honor, which I accept as an honor, not so much for myself, but for the evolution of this field of mediation over the many years. Socrates, who was one of my favorites, I had the chance in university to study ancient Greek and to read Plato in its original, so Socrates really has a deep resonance for me. And Socrates once said, let those who would move the world first move themselves. And as I look back over the last 40 years of being a student and a practitioner of mediation, I find that Socrates' wisdom holds very true there. That I found that the greatest, I worked for a long time, as you know, on getting to yes with Roger Fisher many years ago, which was based not just theoretically, but also practically, and a lot of work trying to bring opposing parties at war together, whether it was the United States and the Soviet Union in the Cold War, or whether it was the Israelis and the Palestinians, or the Catholics and Protestants in Northern Ireland, or the blacks and whites in South Africa. The question was, how can, in the face of very intractable situations, how can people and parties get to yes? And after Roger and I collaborated on that book together with Bruce Patton, we, perhaps the most common question I received in the years after, yes, but how do you deal with difficult people? How do you deal with difficult situations? What if the other side doesn't want to get to yes? What if they use intimidation, and they use power, and they use force, or what if they dig in? How do you deal with those very, very difficult situations? And so I tried to sum up what I'd learned and what we had learned in another book called Getting Past No, about how to negotiate with difficult situations. And I specialized in that, whether it was difficult situations between union and management working in the coal mines, or difficult international situations, doing a lot of work going between Washington and Moscow, seeing what could be done to reduce the risk of an accidental nuclear war, or in business situations, or personal situations, asking that question of how can you get to yes if the other side doesn't want to get to yes. But in the end, I would say, after many years, I came to the conclusion that the most difficult person we ever have to deal with in a negotiation, whether we're a mediator or whether we're a negotiator, is not the person on the other side of the table, however difficult that person might be. The person who really gets in the way of us being able to make progress in a negotiation is right here. It's this person. It's the person I look at in the mirror every morning, which is what led me then on another odyssey to try and understand how does one get to yes with oneself as a foundation for being able to help others get to yes, or to get to yes with someone else. And again, it comes back to the wisdom of Socrates, the ancient wisdom of the Greeks, the motto that was written over the ancient temple in Delphi of know thyself. So that's been my journey, is that I've realized that the secret to peace has three dimensions. It has the dimension we think about, which is the dimension between the parties, the work on getting to yes, that's so important. But it also has the work among, I've learned, because what happens if if both sides don't want to get to yes? What's the BAT now? What's the alternative, the best alternative to a negotiated agreement if it's not in a situation like that, war? What's the alternative to that in an international situation? Because that was always my great question, was growing up under the shadow of the atomic bomb, was, is there some way in which humanity can deal with our differences short of destroying the planet itself? And so what's the BATNA if people are not able to reach agreement, even if they use the best methodologies? And if the alternative is not war, what's the alternative? And I went off as an anthropologist, because that was my original training, and spent a lot of time studying the ways in which indigenous societies deal with their conflicts, and the way, what's our birthright as humanity. And I discovered it was really something I call the third side, which is we tend to see conflict always as having two sides. But in fact, as all societies realize, there's actually a third side, which is the community, the friends, the relatives, the onlookers, the bystanders. And the key to resolving conflict, if the two parties are not able to resolve a conflict, is the third side. And we, of course, know that as mediators. And as mediators, we are third-siders. But the third side, I realized, was a phenomenon much greater than the phenomenon of mediation. It's the community itself getting involved. It's the community itself building a winning coalition, which is strong enough to help the parties reach an agreement. The third side is almost like a container or cauldron within which the most difficult of conflicts can be transformed. Because that's another thing I realized too, is that we talk about conflict resolution, and sometimes conflicts are resolved, but oftentimes the best we can hope for is to transform conflicts because they may go on. And I found that in many cases, particularly in the larger political conflicts, it's not like they just end, it's that their form changes. The war in Northern Ireland between the Catholics and the Protestants, the Unionists and the Loyalists, did not end. The war ended, but the conflict did not end. The conflict just continued through more democratic and peaceful means. And so what the third side does is it serves as a container within which the lead of conflict, the heavy lead of conflict, it's almost like an alchemist's crucible. The lead can be transformed into the gold of dialogue, of negotiation, of democracy, of nonviolent ways of dealing with the conflict. So the third side became very important. So the work we need to do in negotiation is the work in between the parties, but it's also the work among. It's the collective work of building together, building a coalition of parties that's stronger than one individual mediator or even a host of individual mediators, that involves a lot of different parties, weaving that third side together. The third side, in another sense, another analogy would be, it would be like an immune system, it's a social immune system that allows the conflicts to be transformed. So, and then that's two dimensions of the conflict, which is the first one is the between and the second is among. But then as I learned, the third one is within. And we need those three dimensions of conflicts. We need the work, the first person work within ourselves, as Socrates says. We need the two-person or the two-party work, working with the two parties. And then we need the third dimensional, the third side work with the three, which effectively gives us, in a successful, what we're aiming for in negotiation, I found increasingly, is a triple win. It's not just a classic win-win, but there's an internal win, an internal victory, as we get to yes with ourselves. There's the double win of the classic double win of mutual gains negotiation. And then there's a triple win where the third win is a win for the community. But that's the key in negotiation. And if I may just put all of that together in an experiment that I conducted over the last few years, which I've always wondered whether or not in these very difficult negotiations and conflicts, whether a single mediator is enough, is to build a team of third-siders to try to address a conflict. And the year before last, we tried that out on the escalating nuclear crisis between the United States and North Korea, where there was a risk as the two leaders, President Trump and Chairman Kim Jong-un, were playing a game of nuclear chicken, really saying neither would back down. Kim Jong-un was fast developing nuclear weapons and nuclear missiles, including ICBMs, and President Trump said it wouldn't happen. It would never happen. And so it looked like it might be a collision, which could lead to a nuclear war. And experts were saying that the chances of war were as high as 50%. So a group of colleagues and I sort of decided to band together, not as classic mediators, but as third-siders, to see if we could help the parties find an off-ramp, an exit ramp. And we put together a team that went at this conflict 24/7, a team that would ask themselves this question of who could do what in this conflict tomorrow morning that could reduce the risk of a nuclear war. And I worked with a number of colleagues. We had a number of, it was a team of at least 12 people who were working, activating a network, making trips to Washington, to Seoul, to Pyongyang, trying to have meetings with high-level officials, memos and meetings, using creative problem solving, but using persistence, using intensity. And I feel that that's really the future of our field, is that we need to look beyond the individual mediator to teams that are working collectively on this, playing a host of different roles, not just the role of mediator, but also the role of, there are many different roles in the third side. Some of the roles are teaching skills of negotiation. Some of the roles are just building bridges, building relationships between sides. Some of them are around setting up early warning systems. There's a whole host of roles that need to be played in the third side, which leads me to the conclusion after 40 years that we're still in the infancy of this field. There's still so much room for experimentation, for creativity, for drawing on other fields, whether it's anthropology or design thinking or sociology or many, many, many different fields that can be drawn upon to bring the collective wisdom of humanity into very focused, team-like, persistent efforts to reduce the risks of war, to help the parties resolve difficult and intractable conflicts. So this is the moment for experimentation, for new possibilities. And that's how I would end, is simply by saying, at the end of all these 40 years, having wandered the world and worked in many different conflicts around the world, from Venezuela to Aceh, to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, to Ethiopia and Sudan, to Serbia and Croatia, I must say I've never seen a situation where there wasn't a possibility, some possibility of transforming that situation. So in the end, when people say, well, are you a pessimist or an optimist? I say, I'm a possibilist. I believe in our possibilities. And I have a lot of faith in our field of mediation to contribute to those possibilities. I want to wish you all much success with the Congress. And thank you again very, very much from my heart for this beautiful honor that you've given me, and I hope all of my colleagues and the field, that will shine a light on the possibilities that lie for us to make a better world for our children and our grandchildren. Dankeschön.